Are you guys ready for the final episode of the Energy is Love podcast? We are kind of.
Kind of.
We're actually really sad that this is the last episode of the podcast, but we want to thank everybody in a really, really big way, which is why we decided to actually do the final episode of the podcast, right?
So come join us for the last episode of the Energy is Love podcast while we take you through a little bit of our journey and what you've meant to us.
Are you excited, baby?
I'm excited. And it's bittersweet.
It's been 8 years, 382 episodes, countless interviews, moments on this podcast, and our journey all along the way. During the episode, we also catch you up with what's coming with the Steph and Craig Show.
It's our brand new podcast starting May 1st.
You can go to stephandcraig.co. That's stephandcraig.co. Sign up for our newsletter there and be the first to find out when the episodes launch. It is coming May 1st, and we're going to have some teasers leading up to that, so you want to make sure and sign up for our newsletter. If you've been a longtime supporter of the podcast, we really appreciate it. It's hard to express the gratitude that we have for everybody that's listened and supported the podcast, and we do our best throughout this episode. But in the meantime,
thank you for joining us again here on the Energy is Love podcast for the last time. And from our hearts to yours, here we go.
You're listening to the Energy is Love podcast.
This was holy shit.
I know. We had to get through it.
Did we?
Yeah.
We did. Did we?
We got through it.
We.
One of us got through it.
I don't know that I did.
We got through it.
Okay.
This is the last episode. It's 382 episodes of the Energy is Love podcast.
Is this 382 or is this 383?
I have notes, babe.
I'm so glad.
This is 382.
This is 382?
This is 382.
382. Can we look up what the angel number is for 382?
Go ahead. Look up the angel number while I keep talking.
Yes.
So we are on our brand new set for the Steph and Craig Show, and we thought it would be really, really fun to record the final episode of Energy is Love on this set as a teaser, as a way to like show you what's coming, because we have a brand new podcast that we've been developing over the past couple of months, which is why there hasn't been new episodes of the Energy is Love podcast. And we're going to talk all about that on this episode, as well as our journey and our experience with the podcast and how much it's meant to us in our life and our relationship. And oh my gosh, I got to slow down a little bit. Talking super fast, but
we got time.
We got time.
We're going to stay here. And
it's the new set. It's the new podcast that's coming. We have like all new things, including like a producer now. Shout out to Matt, who's behind camera here, not recording, but producing the podcast. He'll be on the Steph and Craig Show as well, doing all of this stuff there. And we just get to get into this episode. We get to honor the Energy is Love podcast for what it was and what it's meant to us in all sorts of different ways. And where do you want to start, babe? Oh, you were pulling up angel numbers.
Yeah, 382. 382 for this number is about personal growth and development. It can bring love and relationships into focus. This number encourages you to focus on self-growth so that you can become the best version of yourself.
Well, that's fucking perfect.
It's perfect.
Right?
Yes.
That's absolutely perfect. Of course, that's supposed to be the final episode of this show, right? And then that's how we go into the new show.
Yes.
Where should we start? Yeah. Like, I don't know if
we should start at the beginning.
Start at the beginning. Okay, let's start at the beginning. The podcast was launched. I wrote down some notes. I took some notes for this. Let's see. My notes aren't in any order at all.
Well, neither was nothing's linear.
Because I started taking them down and I was like, oh, I should put this in a linear fashion. And then I was like, no, you don't do anything
We
that
don't
way.
do anything
May
that
25th,
way.
2016 is when this podcast launched.
Was it really?
That was the first episode.
Oh my gosh.
Right. And it's been unreal to think that 8 years later, we're coming to an end. I thought that this podcast was going to be around forever.
So did I.
Right?
Yeah.
I thought that this was going to be the thing that we were going to be like 70 recording episode 5,000 of the Energy is Love podcast.
Yeah.
Right. I never thought that we would put, like, through everything that we've evolved and changed through, I thought the podcast was going to be the constant and the consistent.
I did too. And I not only thought that, but I wanted it to be, and I thought that I needed it to be.
What's the need part?
I think the need part is because it's been such a bonding with you, like such deep connection. Every episode that I've been able to be on with you, because it didn't start that way, but every episode since I joined you in this journey, I get this complete time to like dive in. It's a super connection, and I'm learning about you. And sometimes it was fun, and sometimes it was scary and sad and angry and like learning things that I didn't know, seeing sides of you that I haven't seen. So it's just been this, like a lot of it, we talked about it being like couples therapy in a sense for us. Like we got on and was like going through our own talk therapy sessions together. And
Which is really healthy, by the way.
well, we're switching it up, right? It was what it meant. It was what it needed to be.
Yeah.
And it helped us tremendously. And from everyone listening and writing into us and letting us know, seeing the realness, seeing like that take place, helped them see you were seeing yourselves reflected in some of our content and feeling a connection there and seeing, I don't know, like just feeling that unity in that space of, oh, hey, me too. That's not just me. I feel like that. Oh, these are options. I want that. This whole thing where we kind of went through it together. And then when you amazing listeners are like our family joining in with us and that we're connecting with you. And it's like, it just felt like this whole thing where we were growing together. It felt like this community. And then it felt like it was just such a part of our lives that I wove it into, I guess, the fabric of our relationship. And so I thought as long as we're still
Together,
co-hosting,
then, right?
The energy is love, like, I don't know. I just tied it in. So
That it was going to be there.
yeah. And so that was a shift. It's okay. You know, we're still doing it.
Fuck
even
it,
if
we're keeping it alive.
right. It's, I see that it's more than that, but for a while it was my lifeline in a sense to I'm like, we've got
as long
this.
as we have the podcast, we're going to stay together.
I know it's silly,
No,
but
I'm
that's
curious. Was
how
that
it
part
felt.
of your, was that?
It was like, we have this.
Yeah.
We have this because we're always going to show up and talk to each other. We're always going to show up and be in this space together. Because we have this, we're always going to come here.
Mm-hmm.
And we do it anyways, all the time.
We don't talk unless we're on the podcast.
Right, that's it. How many times have we been like, man, this would be an episode. We should be, because
Right.
we have these amazing conversations. But there was just something about it that felt necessary. That it doesn't feel necessary anymore, but it's full of gratitude now. Do you relate to any of that?
I relate to all of that.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. There were times where we were going through some of our many difficult moments.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what happens if we break up? What are we going to do with the podcast? Where's the podcast? You know, that's a silly thing. Obviously, it's like more importantly, like what's going to happen with us and our life. And like, that's going to be a really hard thing. And I would think that as well. But then there was that other part of my brain that was like, I don't know, man, the podcast, what are we going to do with the podcast? And it's so silly, but I agree. I think it's been a very integral part of our life. I have to say that word very slowly. Integral.
I was thinking about how I would have butchered it.
I always say integral. Like in my brain, I don't think integral. I think
integral.
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 Yeah.
I think integral.
I think integral. And then when I say integral out loud, I'm like, that's not how you say that word.
So I would say integral or whatever I thought and be like, that's
Right.
I nailed it.
Intricate. Intrinsic.
Or that. All of those things.
Right? It's been amazing. So at the beginning of the podcast in May of 2016, let's see, we'd been together 4 years at that point.
Yes.
We'd been married for just over a year.
Yep.
We had been living together in the same house for 2 years. We bought that house in 2014.
No, I think it was a little more. Was it 14 or 13?
I think it was 14. We've played this game.
We have, but we never remember because
this is like
time
if
is
there's
rough.
a drinking game for the energy is love.
I know it was January 13th.
Of 2014.
But so was it 1/13/14?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think I remember the memory coming up on Facebook this year as 10 years.
As 10 years?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that fits because we lived in the house for 9 years before we moved to Tennessee.
So in May of 2016, we were together for a while. We're kind of knee deep in relationship stuff. And we're also on the heels of Craig not losing. I love framing it that way. I'm like, I lost my job. I don't know where I put it. I set it down.
Here, now it's not.
Yeah. But no, I got fired from being a police officer in 2015, right after we got home from our honeymoon, which sent me into a spiral of deep depression and anxiety and stress and chaos and alcohol-induced wonderful experiences. Not really. I mean, they weren't wonderful. I definitely drank way too much. And then not wanting to go back into some sort of career that was law enforcement in any way. I definitely didn't want that. But I also didn't want to go into some sort of like 9 to 5 job. I didn't want to go work at, because before law enforcement, I was like working at warehouses, driving forklifts, doing all sorts of those kind of gigs. I didn't want to do any of that. I wanted to go towards my dream of helping people. And that looked like energy work at the time. And we were balls deep in that as well, right? Where we were
balls deep,
just balls deep in energy work.
That's where we were.
And using that as a catalyst for our healing and our growth and our connection. And I mean, that's really where Energy is Love stemmed from, was the spiritual connection that you and I both felt, and that we both kind of, I think you and I had a spiritual awakening when we got together. And that coincided with, I mean, really, and we've talked about that, haven't we? Like,
oh, I'm sure.
Do you feel like that was the case?
I do, because
because it wasn't just life changes and like, because we were both in our early 30s.
Yes, very, very, very barely 30s.
Right. And then it was like, oh shit moments. And
I had to like lean into the fact that all of like the spiritual stuff wasn't evil. I had to lean into, I had these connections, but I was very careful that it was, anything beyond the Christian aspect of it. And so it was, I had this clump, like resistance, this shell that I could be in, and you had your experience. And so then when we came together, I feel like it was just this whole like a possibility.
Yeah.
The awakening, as you would say.
Totally.
Which is a ride.
You were still working at Dispatch.
Yeah.
And I was doing readings at events and trying to make that a thing. And then a buddy came over to the house and recorded an episode of a podcast that he was putting together at the time at our kitchen table. And it was like so fun. And then I was like, this is what I'm going to do, babe. This was amazing. I think I'm going to start a podcast. And
I'm so happy with that. There was that part where you were recording, because I was sitting in the front room and watching it happen. And it was like, you need to have your own podcast. Like, I was just like, wait, like,
were you thinking that?
So much.
Yeah.
I thought I've told you that. Have I not?
I think you probably have.
I was like, well,
we're just going to pretend that we haven't ever had any of these conversations.
Never, because we never talk. We've never had conversations.
I was thinking about how frequently you and I tell each other the same thing. Like,
oh no, are we that age?
We are that age. Where we're like, let me tell you a story, babe. And you're like, fucking lived that one with you, honey. Like, that's a story.
I love it when you're like, when you'll also like confuse parts of your life that before you even met me.
I don't do that.
So it's like, I'm always there.
I've never been with anybody
beside you.
beside you.
The other day. I remember it coming
Life
up
began with
when
Steph.
It was like, I was like, what was COVID like for you? How did you experience it? And then I was like, I was there.
Right.
I know what
so much of that has been blocked.
And I was like, wow,
out.
that was, I was like, so how did you get through? What
so
did
you
you
were
guys
sitting
do?
there watching us record that little interview at the table.
And I knew that I was like, you need to be doing your own. Why aren't you doing your own? And it was very, like, I was also like, Craig could do, the perfect you. So I don't know how much like.
I could do the perfect me.
No, I'm trying to say, does this fit in?
I have a skill set that works really well for podcasting.
It does, but that's not how I was trying to word it. I'm trying to figure it out, actually. And I don't think I'm going to be able to hash it out. So instead of just like going to that, it was just very intense, It was very much like almost, because I didn't really understand how to regulate my emotions. It was almost angry. I'm like, you should be doing this. Why aren't you doing your own? You should be not mad at you.
Oh.
But I was like, you're not a guest, you're the host.
I see what you're saying.
Like, you're like flip the seats, even though like, no, like that's just how I could process emotions at that time. I was like, this is really cool. You should do your own. I was like, you're the host. You're the host. And it's just, I think it's just because I could see it.
Yeah.
But I didn't, like, again, I didn't have any emotional regulations. I didn't know how to access what that felt like, other than you should be leading this conversation. You should have your own podcast. This is. And I remember you saying it to me and being like, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
You were so supportive. I think it was the same day too, right?
It was.
Like my buddy left. Randy, shout out to Randy Palmer.
Yes.
He's been on the podcast too a long time ago.
And you absolutely get to host too. I'm so sorry. It wasn't.
I remember just feeling like that was such a cool experience, and it was so exciting to just have a fun conversation like that. And I wasn't really into podcasts at that point. I mean, podcasting has been around, I
You
think.
listen to a lot of NPR. So
Yeah,
you
but
were
that's
hearing,
not really
talk, it's talk
podcasts.
radio, though.
Yeah, that's way different.
I don't know.
Trust me.
Did I just get
Trust me.
Did I just get kicked out of the podcast club for saying
You're
that?
definitely not kicked out of the
I'm
podcast
not.
club.
Okay, good.
But in 2016, they weren't as big as they are today. They were pretty big, right? There were definitely some really big podcasts around at that time, but it wasn't like everybody and their dog had a podcast like it is today. And we're starting a new one, which I think is really funny because now, like, there's a part of me that when because we're in the process of setting up the new show and getting everything ready, and I'm like reaching out to people and we're sending people, invites to come be on the show. And it's like, hey, we know what we're doing. Like, we act like it's not a new podcast, even though it's a new podcast.
It's a new podcast, but we are not new podcasters.
Right. So trust us, you can come be on the podcast. It's going to be
some
good.
Experience. We got some episodes under our belt.
But energy is love was already in our space. That was a phrase that kind of came forth from my connection to spirituality and my connection to energy and my understanding of it, that love is just energy and energy is just love, and it's all connected and we all stem from it and everything like that. And so that was like a deep spiritual belief and a basis for really how I live my life and how I lived my life at the time, or was trying to live my life at the time. That was really a thing that happened through police work as well. Anyhow, trying to go back to that period of time. What's hard is that, like, it was a really hard part of our life.
Yeah.
Like sitting back into those moments of, okay, 2016, that meant all of this fucking shit.
Yep.
That meant all of this, like, pain and sadness. And so it was a really hard part of our life. But the podcast became an obsession. I remember as soon as we decided we were going to do it, then it was like, I went into the rabbit hole of trying to figure out what that looked like. How do you create a podcast? How do you produce a podcast? How do you do all these kind of different things, which was not in my wheelhouse at all. And that was fun. Like, it was fun to learn about all of those different things.
Superpower.
Yeah. ADD is full swing in those moments where
it had your back. It's like, we will learn everything.
We got the first initial investment to buy audio equipment from my older brother, Brian. He was a sponsor of the podcast for a long time. And that's because those first few episodes, probably like the first 20 episodes or something, it was a shout out to Brian. He was like the sponsor of the podcast because he made the first investment in the podcast so we could buy microphones and equipment. And all the equipment that I got, I made sure to have, like, quote unquote, the best audio equipment that I could find that was also portable, because I just started driving around and hitting people up, and not like random people.
Sometimes.
Yeah. But it was more like,
hey, you look interesting.
Reaching out to all of those people that were in the realm of spirituality and energy healing and all that kind of different stuff, and having all of those people come on the podcast. And that was super fun.
And like people who had a significant point in your life too. You had like...
Yeah. Like the first episode was Betty, she had this Soulworks, I think is what it was called. So. But there was it's not an energy healing store. It was like a metaphysical shop in Salt Lake City. And it was one of the nicest ones. It was a really big shop. It was really well known. It was a really cool vibe. I mean, that was like just an amazing store to go into, Dancing Cranes. And Betty had a monthly fair there with, I don't know, 15 readers, 15, 20 different people. Yeah. And it was like some of the best people in the space of energy healing and spiritual readings and mediumship and all of those kind of different things. And it was kind of like a big deal if you got to be a part of Soulworks. And then I remember, like, I can't even remember I don't remember how any of that happened. I just remember going and meeting her, and I can't.
Was it through Alice?
It probably was through Alice. Alice is another person that's been on the podcast back in the day. Alice actually
is a very special.
She's a very special lady. She was a big catalyst for my healing and growth into spirituality, and as well as like guide and mentor. And she performed our wedding ceremony.
Yeah,
she performed our wedding ceremony.
She was big sweetheart.
She's a super
She's
sweet
helped
lady.
me the same. And so
Right.
it was like, of course she was going to marry us.
Yeah. She opened up a lot of doors for us in
Yeah.
this space of spirituality and energy and
Mhm.
working with energy and tapping into energy. And the main modality that she taught was theta healing, which we both became certified in. And that was kind of our entry point into working with people in I don't want to say one-on-one, but in a legitimate sense of like, hey, come sit down and let's have a reading, let's have a session. We were using theta to do that at the time. So I got into that Soulworks festival or fair. So then I
Mhm.
had like a monthly gig where I could go and make a little bit of cash as well as work with people. And that was really fun. And I was meeting all of these cool people that were the other participants in that fair, the other practitioners. So those were the first original guests of the podcast. A lot of people like that in that realm and in that space. And it started to kind of grow and expand. And we would do you remember when we used to go do some of the fairs where we'd be on site doing those in-person events, like interviewing people there?
Yeah.
And then in fall of 2016, I started working for a company that manufactures float tanks. And that meant that I started traveling around the country to install.
I have to share something with that because
Go
it's
ahead.
so funny. I mean, and funny and like, haha, not like laughable comedy, but like, are you kidding me? This is how it's going to work out. Because I was at work and my work bestie was talking to me about how hard it is with her husband and traveling and how he's always flying and always gone and all this time. And I was just like, I do not know how you do it. I am so glad that Craig doesn't. And that's how you told me, because I came home from that and I told you like, man, I'm so glad you don't do that. And you were like, so and
Turns
that's how the
out.
conversation came. And I was like, are you fucking kidding?
Is that really how it went down?
That's how my memory is of it.
That's funny.
So what's your memory of it?
I don't even remember that conversation
Okay.
of us having the
Well,
conversation.
it had a significant impact on me of
Mhm.
this is it.
This is what's
This
happening.
is it. No, not like this is what's happening, but like this is the end.
Did you think it was going to be the end?
Yes, I knew it was.
How many times have you had that thought? I remember because you brought it up to
Well,
when I went on,
in some contexts, it
when I went
has
to
been the end.
Yellowstone, right?
It's been, well,
You're
Yellowstone
right.
was different. It
It
has
has
been.
been
It's
the
been
end.
the end of where we were and the start of something new. I just didn't see it would be the start, and it didn't have to be the start of something new because
I wonder
we
if that's
were-
what it is.
Yeah,
Like if you have this sensation and knowingness of like, oh, this is the end.
yeah.
But you're, that part of your brain that's like, we're ending, we're breaking up, is running it through that filter as opposed to like the
Yeah.
deeper thing of like, oh no, this is just the end of not a cycle, but an end of a, I don't know. I don't want to say era because that seems
Right.
like it's too big.
It's the end of the way that our relationship was up until that point or
Yeah.
something. I don't know. Yeah, it was very different. Yellowstone and you going to work with Dream Pod was very different.
That's true.
You going to work for Dream Pod was a, oh
This
my
is the
God.
end.
And we were in toxic cycles. And
Yeah.
so the toxicity just grew and grew and grew with that. And I I sensed it. But like that was very much a chaotic, like panic, anxiety, like the attachment of it was just every way that nobody really wants to admit to being is how I was with that. It was traumatic.
Yeah.
And Yellowstone was very different. That this is the end. It was a like it was a peaceful sensation. It was I understood what it meant and I was walking into that willingly and lovingly and letting go.
You totally thought that we were going to get divorced though, didn't you?
I
Or that we were
did,
gonna
but it
break up?
wasn't panic. It was peace. Not in a, thank God that's over. Just like, I'm okay with this. It was like my brain was like, this is like my love gift to you.
Mm.
This is like my love to you and my like letting you go and knowing that you were going to be healthier for it and you were going to be better for it. And I wanted that for you.
Wow.
So it was a peace, but it was hard.
Yeah.
I was sad and I was scared. I'm still like feeling the emotions tapping into it, but I was okay with it and I knew what it meant. And so like, if you remember how that came about, I was willing to take all that on because I knew you needed it. And it was I love you and you can go.
That's a part of the podcast too. Like podcasting is directly correlated with what you're talking about right now with
Okay.
Yellowstone and everything. I love you.
Oh, thank you. I love you too.
Because your husband is a complete neuro person. Just push your mic away a little bit from your body. Just
It
all
wouldn't be the
just-
Energy is Love
Just push away a little bit.
podcast
little
if you
bit
weren't more.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Can you hear me?
Sometimes you're on top of it. It's under your
it's because
chin.
I've been trained for years to get like
Trained?
come closer. Yeah, trained. I have been trained almost with treats. Get closer to the microphone. I feel like this is crazy. This is. Can
So,
you hear me? Am I coming through?
He's
Okay. Yeah, I'm
fine.
checking.
Yeah,
I'm not
you
asking
can
if he's
hear.
okay.
He
I'm
can
asking
hear
if
you.
I'm okay.
I'm a jerk. When I started the podcast, I was obsessed with having good audio. Like that was the one thing that I hyper focused on was we had to have really, really good audio. And so we bought decent enough
these are too
equipment
loud.
to get good audio out of it. But then I became hyper focused on like all the audio is going to be amazing forever and ever and ever.
Like watch the table. Don't
Yeah.
tell. Like, and it's you're an asshole. Did you say
I was
asshole?
definitely an asshole at times.
You were just very. It was like a over hypersensitivity. So it was a hyper focus and a hypersensitivity.
Yes.
So not only did you want the audio to see, I'm coming towards it again. Not only did you want the audio to be good, understandably, but sounds that you knew that it was picking up, that was going to come through,
Right.
was like nails on a chalkboard for you.
Yeah, yeah.
It was really intense. So it used to drive me crazy, and then sometimes I would be like,
Yeah, then
"Oh,
you
I'm
fuck
about
with
to."
me. So
Tell
in-
me to get close to the mic one more time.
in 2016, I start traveling for work, which meant it gave me an opportunity to expand the reach of who I could interview and contact. And floating, like if you're not familiar with floating and sensory deprivation tanks, we're not going to talk about it a great deal at all. Go Google it. You can find out what floating is. But there's a direct, those two things like energy healing, spirituality, meditation, like self-work, all of that ties closely in with floating and with sensory deprivation. And like the two realms of those two things really have a lot of crossover. And
Yeah.
so it felt kind of serendipitous on one hand because there were people in the floating community that I got to connect with and talk to and interview, which was really fun. But then also when I would travel somewhere, I would Google search wherever I was going to be and see if there was some metaphysical shop somewhere, something in that area that I could reach out to and talk to whoever was in that place, right? And that was amazing. Like we had some really fun interviews with people when I was going through and kind of pulling some notes for this episode. It was like, oh my gosh, I forgot about that person and that person and that person. And some of the people have continued to like, quote unquote, be friends, right? I mean, you're friends on
Right.
Facebook with people, but people that you still kind of engage with and interact with. And so that's been really neat. And so that happened, and I would cram everything into a suitcase and go out on these install jobs for DrainPod and then get done with the installation portion of it and hurry up and drive across town somewhere and set up in, the middle of these shops somewhere, or trying to think of we've done interviews in vans, down by the river. I'm trying to think of all the different places that I've recorded the podcast
Yeah.
over the years. But what started to happen with it was, Stephanie was on episode 20 was the first time you were on. Are you ready for this, babe?
I'm ready.
So that's the first time that you were on. It was July 12th of 2016.
Oh, okay.
So it wasn't very long after the podcast launch. You were on episode 20. And that was the first time that we that's the first time that the podcast was recorded outside.
Was it?
Yeah.
Oh.
So prior to that, we were in this little studio space, but that was the first time that we recorded the podcast outside. Let's see what else. Yeah. It was cool.
That's all we got to say about it.
Yeah. We should go back and listen to that. We always
Oh
say
my
that.
gosh. I don't
Episode
even
20,
know.
if you want to go back and hear that. That was the first time Steph was on. And it was so wonky.
Oh,
like,
it would have to be.
Yeah.
I'm feeling panic just hearing that. I knew how scared I was.
Yeah.
I probably smoked an entire pack that one episode.
Do you
I was
remember?
so nervous.
What do you remember about that episode?
I remember nothing about that. I remember one thing. I remember being scared about how much I could actually talk about because I was very like, I can't seem crazy. I'll lose my
Right.
job. I can't, say anything that'll put me at risk for my job. So I had to be very careful. So I don't know how much I just remember being really scared.
How funny
And
is
you're
that?
like, you could say it. And I'm like, I don't think I can.
Right.
Shit doesn't go well when you talk about what's real.
That's so interesting. I kind of
Yeah.
forgot that phase of like being nervous to talk about like the belief of energy
Yeah.
and spirituality and out of body experiences and like astral projection and
Mhm.
all these other kind of things that like I don't think we have anymore. I don't think we have any fear around
We
it
have no
anymore.
reason to now.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not something that we really think about. It wasn't
Yeah.
even on my radar
Yeah.
anymore.
A government professional job isn't ready to be like, you're crazy.
That's true.
We're firing you.
That's true.
So
Little did they know
little did
you'd
they
fire
know.
them
Right.
a few years later. What year did you quit?
I believe it was 2017.
Was it?
Mm-hmm. It was, I think it's funny because I made the decision on March 12th and I think I turned in my resignation on March 14th. So pretty close to this.
Yeah. Like that's what I
Yeah.
was looking at when I was going back through all these episodes and cycles and patterns, right?
Mhm.
You and I have, and when I say you and I feel like everybody applies to this. This is something that I think everybody cycles with nature and going through like the seasons of, I have to think about them for a minute, spring and summer and fall and winter. And
I like how you drew it.
right. So much of our path and our trajectory, like winter for us is a really heavy, when I say dark, it's like, that's when we do kind of some really deep processing work.
Yeah. That's usually when I get a coach or a mentor or somebody to like
To help
me like and pull to the next.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's probably something I should try. I usually just get really depressed and fall into like my unhealthy toxic patterns and behaviors and
Yeah.
spiral out usually during the
It's-
winter.
It's
I
not
eat
a
a lot.
conscious choice. I do all that too.
Right.
It's not a conscious choice. I'm not like, oh, here we go. It's just opportunity comes in Scorpio season. In the
Mhm.
fall, something comes to me that gets like my blood pumping and I get excited for it. And then it happens to where I'm working with somebody. Something transformative thing is happening at that place. And I think that helps me because it is so dark and hard. And we only had awareness of it recently that I'm like, oh, I did this in the fall. And then I did this in the fall. And now I'm doing this in the fall. Okay, there's a pattern
Yeah.
here is that.
And then springtime.
Yeah.
So it's like fall for us is the time period where, yes, you're reaping the benefits of like all the work that you put in and spring and summer.
Yeah.
And, you know, like spring and summer is a lot of like chop wood, carry water, where we're just really putting in the reps of building whatever it is that we're currently building. And then in the fall, we're like, man, this is amazing. And then fall leads into winter, which then becomes all of this introspective work of like, where are we at? What's going on? It's like relationship stuff. It's
Big shifts happen.
our inner work process of like
We let go
individually.
of a lot.
We do.
We let go of a
We
lot.
shed a lot during the winter time.
Mhm.
And then the spring is this time period of birthing new ideas and new things. And we're coming out of like hibernation in a sense. And that's directly correlated with this episode as well as the Steph and Craig
Right.
show and all of that kind of stuff. But 2017, you quit Dispatch
Mhm.
and go to massage school. In 20, forgot to find out when that was.
And what was?
It wasn't until 2020 that you were a regular on the podcast and began co-hosting.
Was it 2020? I thought it was 2019 or 2018.
It could have been.
I think it might have been 2019.
It is. It is 2019.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about, see how good I did with my notes?
You did so good. I would come on it frequently. We had like little segments. First I would just like come on and then I would pick numbers. I'm like, I better be, this
Oh,
episode's
yeah.
mine. You know, I want this episode because
yeah.
of the numbers. And then we started segments of, I think it was coconut
Coffee with Steph and Craig.
Yeah. And then that was like, we would do that frequently.
Mhm.
And then it turned to
123.
123.
Episode 123 is when you, like from that point on is
1,
when
2,
you
3?
started. Yeah.
And it's 23.
Yeah.
Oh, of course it is.
Right.
I love that.
And I was supposed to
makes me
write
so
down
happy.
dates for all of these things. But,
123. I have been a constant way more than I thought.
oh yeah, baby.
I did not recognize that.
Way more, like there's been more episodes. We've talked about this too, but there's more episodes
First
with
awareness.
Steph and Craig than with just Craig. Like basically the first 100 episodes was me interviewing people and that part of my
you
life
you
where,
were getting it warmed up. You
yeah,
were getting it going. You were doing all the work.
yeah.
And then I got to come in and be like, whew. I got the easy part of the Sarah talk.
But what happened over these months and years of, 2016, 2017, and into 2018 was I was starting to get really bored with interviewing people about energy healing stuff. And it's not that I was like, it was twofold where, yes, I was getting bored with talking to people about those things, but my own individual journey as well was starting to shift and change, where it wasn't playing as big of a role in my life because, at the time, now I see it through a different lens, and I'm sure you can relate to this too, babe, but using all of those amazing skills, those like tapping into higher consciousness and out of body experiences and deep meditation and all of those things at the time, I was using those to really bypass all the emotional things that I was going through and was, avoiding all of the things that we needed to address in our relationship and in my life. And so it was just that classic spiritual bypassing that was taking place. And then I was listening to Joe Rogan's podcast, which once we started this podcast, then I kind of became obsessed with podcasts.
Yeah.
And like every other man in the United States, I listened to Joe Rogan obsessively. And because for whatever reason, it doesn't matter. And so I was listening to his podcast one afternoon while I was out back mowing the lawn. And there was a man that came on. His name was Dan Doty. And
I forgot that you found him from Rogan.
Right?
I don't know how I forgot that. But yeah, that's right. That's cool.
And Dan came on and was talking about this thing that he was doing called Everyman. And he was talking about men and their emotions and men's work and helping men process through and feel emotions and all of these kind of different things. And it was just stuff that really started to spark and hit for me.
Yeah.
And I remember coming in and talking to you. And at the time, his organization, Everyman, that he started, was just launching. So he was coming on Rogan and he was talking about that. And they were having their first Yellowstone expedition, which is like this week-long backpacking trip into Yellowstone, like a few months later. Like hearing about Dan, I think was probably in the springtime. And then that expedition was in August.
I think so too, because
Right. Because I remember like I was literally outside mowing the lawn and it felt like a spring day. So it was, spring, summertime. And I come in and I talk to you about this thing, Everyman. And two things. I was like, I'm going to reach out to Dan Doty and see if he wants to be on the podcast. Because that was one thing that was really cool with the podcast was it gives you the excuse to talk to whoever you want.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's one thing that's been a huge benefit for us is we're like, hey, come be on the podcast because secretly I just want to have a conversation with you. Like we have a huge lineup of guests for the Steph and Craig show. And that's all it is. It's like, hey, I want to hang out with you and talk to you. And
you're going to love hearing from them too.
Yeah. So Dan was one of those people that I just really wanted to sit down and talk to. And so I hit him up and ended up driving to Bozeman, Montana, which is where he lived at the time, and recording an episode of the podcast with him, like up in his closet, up in his bedroom.
That's right.
There was this little tiny space where it was so fun. And they had a podcast at the time too, called the Everyman Podcast. And we did an episode for that. And all of that was just really cool. It was so neat to have like that experience of hearing this guy on Joe Rogan's podcast, which was a really big, it still is obviously the best, the number one podcast. But then being able to meet him in person and spend time with him and do podcasting stuff with him. And then rewind to when I first heard about Everyman and heard about him, it was like, oh, I would love to go on that expedition, but there's just no way. And the expedition, I think, was like $4,000 or $5,000 because it's this all-inclusive week-long experience in Yellowstone. And was it the same day or was it the next day or something? I don't remember exactly, but you came, I think it was probably the same day.
It was you, because we were in the garage having our smoke conversations.
Right. One of our 25 smoke breaks that day.
And you were telling me about it and how much you wanted to go, but it was just too much money.
Yeah.
We didn't have that money at that time, but you wanted to go and, you weren't trying to figure out how to make it happen. You were just like that longing. You're like, you really wished that you could go kind of thing. And it was the same day.
It was the same day because I go back to mowing the lawn and then like you come out and you're like, you can go. I looked at everything and we can.
I got my credit extended
Did
on
you?
the credit card because we didn't have. I'm like, because I had like, this was years, right? I had
Yeah,
like a
yeah.
$700 limit that was paid,
Uh-huh.
and I was like, it had been paid and didn't have it for so long, and we had the card for so long that I was like, how much? Like, can you extend my credit? How much can I extend it for? And they said we can extend it to 5,000. I'm like, let's do it. And it was the perfect amount.
Wow.
So I was like, yeah.
Whether I remember that part or not, I thought it was just like figuring out how much was available on that
put
card.
it on a credit card.
I remember putting it on the card. That's so cool.
Yeah.
So that's a huge act of love, especially given like earlier in the episode, you were getting all emotional about like.
I told you what it meant.
Yeah.
Like I said, like, yeah.
Yeah. So it was definitely a transitory moment in my life going on that expedition.
It was.
And it opened up this whole other avenue of like growth and development, because suddenly it became my entry point into connecting to all the emotions that I had and all of the emotions that I hadn't been processing and feeling for the past 30 plus years of my life. So it was a really, really big deal.
Yeah.
And it started to change everything about our relationship, as well as like the focus of the podcast. Because then it became, that's all I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about emotions. I wanted to talk to men about their emotions. I wanted to find ways to bring more awareness to men being able to communicate about emotions. Came home from that expedition and started the men's group, which was like a weekly group where all of these guys came together. And
how many years did you do that?
It was like 4 years or something like that of the men's group. So that transition really shifted up a lot of the podcast. And that was also the same time frame that you started coming on, and we started talking way more about us and our relationship and all the work that we were doing, as well as like trying to navigate all of that on this podcast.
I love that, like your connection of like being able to express emotions, feel emotions, tap in and talk about emotions. And here we are, right? You're doing this, you're willing to step into this. And now I'm coming on the podcast. I'm coming on.
It's a podcast.
Podcast, and our relationship starts healing.
Yeah.
We start having like these sessions, these therapy sessions in a sense.
Yeah.
Like I know they're not therapy sessions, but like what else would I label them as? What else? Like that's what they were. They were healing sessions for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then we just started getting into it.
We did.
Like good and bad. And everything became us sharing our experiences. We still had guests on the podcast randomly, but they were much fewer and farther in between. And it was like, it was still an option to have people come on the podcast. And we used it a lot. We had tons of people after that time period as well. And we had some great interviews with a bunch of different people. And I would still travel. I wouldn't really worry about podcasting as much anymore when I would travel.
Yeah.
Just simply because it became too much to try to do all of it.
But every now and then, all that on planes.
Yeah.
All over.
Every now and then there'd be a good opportunity. We had some like fun traveling ourselves with the podcast, and like anytime we used to record on location somewhere, those were always so freaking fun.
So fun.
Right.
I loved it.
We had our anniversary once at this Baker Hot Springs. So if you're in Utah, Google Baker Hot Springs and go out there and sit in a old muddy puddle of hot water that's in the middle of nowhere. And that was like one of our favorite places because it was remote, and it was like there's nothing other than some old hot springs that people built up like in the 20s or 30s and then abandoned. And so we'd go out there and camp in our van.
Most of the time we had it to ourselves too.
Yeah. So it was really, really
I love that
sweet.
you figured out how to rig a outside shower from our van for me. Like it was for both of us, but you know, like so we could get that because you know, like had to.
Yeah.
Like it was lovely to sit in and then get it off.
So we did an episode that time in the back of the van, and we had all sorts of fucking fun opportunities and times with the podcast. And like you're saying, all along the way, it was our life and our journey, our experiences and our healing. And then everybody listening is getting that lived experience as well as the opportunity to relate to what we were talking about. And I mean,
Yeah, as we were healing and getting help from other people, we were bringing it to the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
The trainings, sometimes it was trainings we were bringing to the podcast. To our personal help, we were bringing it to the podcast. To our like couple work, we were bringing it to the podcast. So it's like a documentation of our progression and our healing and our training for healing and helping others and helping each other,
Yeah.
helping ourselves, learning how to actually help ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking about, because I was looking at everything before we recorded, and it was, I think it was, well, it wasn't last year because it was when we were still in Utah. So it was 2 years ago when we did I can't remember if it was episode 300 or episode 200. It was a
Was
big
it the
episode.
feminine masculine one?
Yes.
Yes.
Where
it was 300 and it was a 2-part episode.
Was it 300?
I'm pretty sure.
Anyways.
I'm almost positive.
But for that episode, because so much of our journey.
I can't believe how much of the shit I remember.
Right? You're
I'm like
way better at it than I am.
Never have I ever. Drinking game. But it's coming through at the moment.
It's this healing journey experience that we've had over the course of our relationship that we've shared through the podcast. But so many parts of it have been different things. Like there was emotional healing that was taking place. There was shadow work, so many different parts of it. We got into healing inner child stuff. That's a big chunk of what the last couple of years has been. But masculine and feminine, and learning how to navigate, being in your feminine when you identify as masculine, all those kind of different things. That's been a component of it as well.
Yeah.
And during that time period, so I guess it was episode 300, when we were trying to balance those energies within ourselves as well as in our relationship, it was my idea that we were basically going to switch, and not just switch sides of the table that we sat on, but I dressed up in some of your clothes. I wore one of my favorite sundresses that you used to have at the time. And then you dressed up as a man, quote unquote, right?
Well, yeah.
And so we had this fun conversation and turned it into this big 2-part episode where we really explored what masculine and feminine energy means in a relationship and how it looks and how it plays out. And it was so funny. I felt so silly at the same time.
I feel like it was a really good one.
I do too.
I felt, because it wasn't like, even though we were depicting, is that the word? Genders switching, but it wasn't about genders. It was about energy.
Yeah.
And like just trying to open up that space of inclusivity. And it was an episode on love and being loving towards yourself and others. And I really liked it. And it was challenging.
It was really hard.
It was challenging. It threw me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did we I don't think we switched sides that we sat on. Oh, we did.
We did.
That's right.
Yeah.
I sat on your side and you sat on my side. It's funny that we have quote unquote side. Well, it's the same thing when we sleep, right? There's a side of the bed that you sleep on and a side of the bed that I sleep on. We just got new beds, by the way.
Yes.
We got like Craftmatic super beds that are adjustable and super comfortable. I'm getting all like emotional.
Okay.
I'm sitting here feeling the weight of 8 years of our life, 380 plus episodes of this podcast.
It's a big deal.
It is a big deal.
It's a really big deal.
Yeah.
It was like, I described it at one point as like, I felt like I grew up on this podcast. I felt like I went from somebody who, didn't have language for emotions or know how to express emotions. I was very, very, emotions are not needed, and like shove it down, shove it down, shove it down. The only way that it really came out was like when it had been shoved down to the point that I couldn't hold anything back anymore. I'm going to talk about how I'm feeling, all of this stuff, this like being so emotionally stunted and just broken in so many different ways, to going through the journey out loud, learning how to talk, literally, using my voice, saying my experiences, my feelings. It was just like I started in my 30s, but that's when I was safe and was able to start actually aging, in a sense, that I was able to start growing from where I stopped, even though I didn't know that at the time, and start to heal, like that inner child, and healing and growing and learning how to talk and learning how to have boundaries and learning how to speak needs and learning how to make connections and like learning how to have a healthy relationship, like everything. I feel like I grew up on the podcast. And I'm not saying I'm done. Like I'm an adult now. I'm trying, but I'm more of I think my teenage years are coming out now more than anything. So I'm at that phase, but
It's gonna be a fun
really
ride.
like growing up on the podcast.
Yeah.
And it's such a beautiful gift. Like I'm really grateful for it. I feel like I attribute a lot of my healing and not just like ours, but my literal growth, my growing up on it because of the podcast, to where I'm working with women, to where I'm helping women, somatic work. I'm doing like coaching and energy and talking. Like I'm not just helping me, I'm helping others. Like there was just so much. I don't even know what to say. Like I stepped into myself because of this podcast. And who's to say that I wouldn't have got there eventually anyways, right? I was on the path, but I can 100% say that I got there faster and stronger because of the podcast. And I might not have ever got there. I might have, I might not, you never know, but I don't have to know, because I know the podcast like had my back on that and helped me. And so that was like a beautiful gift that you gave to me without knowing that you were giving me a gift.
Right.
Yeah. It's pretty cool. And then all of you joining us, coming along for our healing ride, healing with us. It's pretty powerful. Are we sure we're going to end it? I'm like, hold up. Come with us to the Steph and Craig Show, because like we're not done.
Yeah. We're have just so much more to share.
So much more. So come on.
Yeah.
Come hang out with us some more. We got more to do.
I am so grateful that there's an aspect of having to show up week after week and record these episodes that saved our relationship.
Very much.
And we used to talk a lot about, it's weird, like I used to do this terribly unhealthy thing where I would have an idea for an episode or something that I'd want to talk about on the episode, and then I would kind of like surprise you with it.
Yeah.
And ask you really hard questions and try to push you into vulnerability without your consent. And at some point we had an honest conversation about not doing that anymore because of how terribly not healthy that was. And I stopped doing that. But we had so many countless episodes that were just really raw. And part of me is really grateful for that, because at the time we weren't doing the best at having, I mean, we had hard conversations. We've always been able to like sit down and really process through stuff together. But there was some stuff that we avoided, and we would talk about it on the podcast. And of course, there's some things that we've never talked about on the podcast, and we probably will never talk about on a podcast. Maybe.
I don't know.
Who fucking knows?
Not on this one, but who knows about the Steph and Craig Show? So
not on this one.
Only one way to find out. Friends, fans, come on.
I'm really grateful that it helped us stay together, because we had to confront some of the things that we were going through in a different way, as well as learn how to talk about them in healthier ways with each other through the podcast, which then would bleed over into our everyday regular life and relationship as well. And yeah, it's been really cool. Yeah. It's been really, really cool.
There's like something I want to share with us real fast for people listening, is we're talking about the importance of like how the podcast, the major role that it played in our relationship, because we had this time. And so if somebody like might be thinking, well, we don't have a podcast, we don't have that. And I just want to break it down to
your relationship is over.
I want to break it down to something really small here. Is it was an hour a week. There were some times we did 2 episodes a week, but it was an hour a week. That was the time commitment. So when it's feeling like, oh, we don't have a podcast, it's not possible, we committed to an hour a week.
Yeah,
and
like uninterrupted time to talk.
This was our time. 1 hour a week.
Okay, Goonies.
Well,
this is our time.
Right? Like, I kind of want to stress the importance of that, because
I'm trying to make everything really uncomfortable and funny.
Oh, uncomfortable and funny?
I'm uncomfortable, so I'm trying to be funny. I'm pulling a Steph
Well,
here.
I love that you're
Keep
doing
going.
that. Give me
I'll
just a
shut
second
up.
with that, because it's really like signaling is really strong on like the journey and having all this time and how much effort we did put into it, and all like there's over, well, I wasn't, so 123 plus a couple of sporadic. So we'll say what?
260, 270.
Something like that. So hours that just that, like, yes, we did a lot of work on ourselves, but when we're attributing this, an hour a week can really make a difference. And it looks messy and it's really hard. And sometimes you are toxic in it. And sometimes one of you is chaos and the other one is not. It's not always pretty. It's not always put together. And you just keep showing up. And if you can really like think about it and break it down, an hour a week helps build a relationship. An hour a week can save a relationship. An hour a week can really help you get to know your partner and yourself and who you are in that space. An hour a week is something that is obtainable to, well, I was going to say to everyone, but having willing partners is a pretty big deal. Your partner being willing, but I felt like that was really important, because it's like the podcast saved our relationship, but it was an hour a week that we committed to that saved our relationship. And y'all got to hear about it. We had the motivation to show up for that hour a week.
Yeah. Uninterrupted, right? The significance of that, I think, is, I'm glad that you're bringing it up, and I'm glad you're speaking to it, because I mean, we put phones down. We don't have any distractions. It's just you and me sitting in front of each other, having a conversation about stuff.
Yeah.
Good and bad, heavy and light, fun and, dark, all these kind of different things. And
stuff that we learned, stuff that we were excited to share.
Right. There's so many times where we would share something with each other. Yeah. I mean, it's been unreal. Yeah. It's been so cool. So start a podcast, save your marriage, talk about hard things. Thank you, everybody. Like, the Steph and Craig show is coming. We want to talk about that too a little bit before we wrap, but I'm so incredibly deeply grateful that, like, one of the things when we started the podcast, it was like, well, this is going to be fun and we'll see who listens.
Right.
We'll see what happens. But the people that have listened to the show over the years and all the support that we've gotten has just been unreal. And the reality is, like, it's 120 plus countries, hundreds of thousands of downloads. Like, there's been so much love and support for the Energy is Love podcast over the past 8 years. And we've had people that, it's funny because, like, there's like super fans, people that listen to every episode, and there would be people that we would meet, somebody new in our life or something like that. And then they find out that we have a podcast. And then 2 weeks later, they're like, oh my gosh, I just listened to this episode. I listened to this episode. They'd have questions about the episode. And so all of those people, everybody that's ever listened to the Energy is Love podcast, we're really, really grateful. And the big thing that we always wanted to impart, or like our purpose or our mission with the podcast, was to just spark different thoughts and ideas and inspiration, even if it was just for that episode or the conversation that you would carry on in your life with your partner or with your family or with somebody else because of what you heard. And that's something that has been really impactful for us to hear about, that this stuff has influenced you and helped you and affected you. And as we've continued to grow, not just with the podcast, but like on social media and everything like that over the last couple of years, that's been really amazing as well, to see how we have the opportunity to sit here in our house recording all of this stuff and sharing it with everybody. And it helps you all. And that's just been like, there's a part of my brain that still doesn't really process that. Like, it seems very strange because we're so in our stuff, meaning like we're recording content and podcasts and reels and creating all of these different things and interacting with people online. But then to sit back and look at it and realize, oh, wait a minute, like the thing that we've wanted to do is just help people heal, help people through the dark stuff, help people face the different things that are really challenging and hard to face. Like, I don't even want to look at the fucking camera because I'm like, it's a lot. And we're so grateful to have gone through it all. And like, I'm super sad thinking about not recording this show anymore. Like it came at a time when I really needed something. And it came out of nowhere. I had no fucking idea what podcasts were, or that it was going to be something that was so important to me and so like important to us in our life. And I'm so grateful that it showed up. And it feels like something, like it literally feels like the Energy is Love podcast showed up in our life and said, come on, let's go. We're going to go on a journey, and it's going to change you. And we're like, okay, cool. Let's go. And like, it's so sad to see it go in a sense. And it's so funny because I know it's not going anywhere, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's still going to be available out there for people to find and listen to. It's not like we're, you'll still be able to Google the Energy is Love podcast and find episodes, but we're not recording new ones. And there's a part of me that's very excited about that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm so fucking ready for the Steph and Craig show. I'm so ready for all the stuff that we're doing. And like, I'm so excited to launch that podcast and to start sharing all of that with the world. And I think that's going to be able to help people a lot. And I'm really excited about that. And then there's like, it almost feels like you said, we grew up on the podcast. And so it feels like the cool fucking uncle that comes over and hangs out. Like, it feels like this cool version of us that, was crazy at times. Like, there were so many episodes where we were drunk or smoking 2 packs of fucking episode out in the backyard. Or once I started,
Sometimes the edibles hit a little
my
too
God,
hard while
we
we're
had
recording.
so many great episodes where Craig was high as fuck, talking about all sorts of crazy things.
There was one where it just like, I got rocked. I don't know how it happened, but I was like, oh, and we had a guest. And I was like, oh shit.
I remember that episode.
Yeah. And I saw the moment because you looked at me and I looked at you and I was like, you're so fucked. And you're like, I'm so, and you just knew she lost the ability to speak. I've got to do the whole thing. And I was just like, the whole episode. I felt so bad after. I'm like, I don't know how that happened.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it feels like this, like it feels like a wild part, but not in a crazy, just in a, like a wild, untamed version of us in a sense, throwing everything up in the air and seeing what sticks and lands. And it's continually evolved and grown and changed. And we've tried so many different things with it over the years. And
it's been so much fun.
it's so freaking fun.
Yeah. We've had a great time.
Yeah. So much fun with it. And like, all good things come to an end, and that's okay. And this
all
thing,
things come to an end.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're getting the opportunity to honor this thing that came out of nowhere and helped us and helped so many people. And the Steph and Craig show came out of nowhere as well. Like, that's the other really cool thing was at the beginning of October, November of last year, because we talked earlier about cycles and patterns and learning how we navigate those both in our relationship and our individual healing, as well as like a business standpoint. And we were very cognitive of, as we were coming into the fall and we were planning what was 2024 was going to look like for everything, including this podcast, things started to shift and change.
Yeah. You kept saying, like, just even on our last podcast, because we always do, like, this is the last podcast of the year.
Yeah, we
the
do
last
like a final
of the
episode of the year.
And
20, like not the wrap, but the
we
whatever.
Whatever. We like recap the year or something.
Recap,
And you kept saying, this last episode. I'm like, not the last. And you're like, yeah, it makes it sound like the podcast is ending. It's not. You kept having these slips.
Right.
That I was like, no, we're not. And you didn't think we were. I didn't think, but we knew, I guess, because you kept saying it.
The universe was like,
it is actually.
That podcast is ending, folks.
Technically, we still had a final episode to record, but like, we didn't know, even though like it kept coming out. And then, or should I say, little did we know?
Yeah.
Because
not even little did we know, zero awareness.
Zero.
And then the universe just all started to unfold. Like, it came in like a storm. It came in like a winter storm.
Like a wrecking ball.
And And it shifted up everything that we were doing. It shifted up our coaching practice. It shifted up the podcast, our
Oh my gosh,
community
yes.
spaces, like everything that we were planning got immediately just shifted.
Yeah.
And we felt pulled to put everything on hold. And then a few weeks later, we're like, okay, not only are we putting everything on hold, but we're ending the Energy is Love podcast and laying it to rest and starting something new
We closed
called,
our community. We
yeah.
closed our coaching.
And all of that came from being able to trust intuition, trust
Yeah.
the knowingness inside of ourselves that when that pull happens, that we have to go towards it. And when we got that pull, we both were just like, okay, we're going.
Yeah.
And we started building this set, which it's in the same room that we recorded Energy is Love.
Right.
It's just on the opposite side of that room. And
New paint,
everything
new
about
furniture,
this just started
new lights, new cameras.
be birthed
New
out into
action.
the universe in a physical form here in our house. And then slowly over the last few months, we've been letting it all take shape. And we're at a point now where it's launching May 1st.
May 1st.
new episodes of the Steph and Craig Show available everywhere, including all frickin' places that you can watch podcasts. Make sure you go subscribe to us on YouTube because we're doing a ton of new things on YouTube with the podcast there. So you'll want to be there to subscribe. New social, like there's so much that's coming. And if I sit and think about it right now, I'm going to get sick because we have so much to do still. But at the end of the day, we hope that everybody that has loved us and followed us on Energy is Love and been a fan of our stuff comes over and hangs out with us on the Steph and Craig Show. Because one of the things that we kind of joke about behind the scenes is like the Steph and Craig Show is the adult version of us. Like it definitely feels like Energy is Love was definitely our teenage years of, let's see what happens. And we're bringing our best selves to the Steph and Craig Show in a really new way. You'll have some fun episodes. Definitely. I'm sure I'll probably get high at some point on that podcast as well and do a fun episode. Who knows? But it's going to be a lot of us sharing what we've learned over the last decade of being together from the perspective of pulling out all of the best little nuggets of those experiences and those journeys and those the techniques that we've learned, the modalities that we've learned, the real like tried and true stuff that we use every day that we don't even really think about anymore because it's been integrated into our relationships so much. Those are the things that we're going to be sharing on the podcast. And there's going to be 2 episodes a week. So you'll get double Steph and Craig. We're going to have guests come on and share their experiences. So all the people that you follow on social probably already, all the people that you're fans of. If there's people that you want to see on the show, send them to us. But the whole focus of that is there's all of these amazing people in the world that are helping all of us heal together. And they have all of these really beautiful gifts that they're sharing, whether it's novels or books or different techniques, inspiration, all of these people that we've learned from, both you and I, but also you out there listening. We want to hear from those people, but we want to hear there's this part of a journey that happens that you and I've gone through countless times because it doesn't always just happen once, but usually you'll have some big experience in your life that causes you to go, oh shit, I have to change everything. Yeah. My life's falling apart. It's a rock bottom. It's a dark night of the soul. It's this moment in your life where like 2 roads diverge and you go in the direction that you've never gone before. And those moments are some of the hardest moments for people to navigate and heal through. And oftentimes what happens on the other side of that are all of these amazing gifts that they end up sharing with the world. And so when we have guests come on the podcast, on the Steph and Craig Show, they're going to be talking about those moments. They're going to be sharing what those experiences were like for them and sharing it as best as they can, obviously, because those are really hard moments to discuss and share. But you learn some really profound lessons in those moments about yourself as well as about your life. And the focus of that is wanting to share that with you, the listener, because whether you're going through one of those moments or you've gone through one of those moments, it's really hard to see the other side of it. It's really hard to see what's going to come from those experiences. And so we want to highlight that the reality is those experiences
are both challenging and difficult to navigate and go through. And trust us, like, we're not mitigating or minimizing how hard those experiences are.
Yeah.
They're hard as fuck. And some people don't make it through those experiences.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can, and you get through the other side of it, oftentimes you're a completely different version of who you are because everything has shifted and changed in your life. But you're also now living a life that you want to live, and you're helping people, hopefully. And so that's what we're going to highlight on the podcast, because we want to share all of this great stuff with you that has helped us, as well as all of the people that inspire us and all of those people that are helping other people. And the whole idea is that we're just going to all heal together. That's what this whole fucking experience of not just podcasting and social media and life, but I think from like a higher consciousness perspective of why are we here and what is the meaning of life? It's this experience that the universe just keeps having over and over and over again to prove to itself that it's worthy of love and that it's worthy of unconditional love. And by it's us. We're the representation of that, with all of our shadow and shame and our wounds and our karma and all of these different things that we think make it so that we're not worthy of love. But in reality, we're all completely worthy of unconditional love, and the type of unconditional love that loves everything about you unconditionally. So that's the goal, is helping everybody get to see or glimpse or taste some part of that, so that we can all heal together and raise up humanity and society and community. And so we're going to do that. Ourselves. Right. So we're setting the bar kind of high for the Steph and Craig Show. And rightfully so, because we have a lot to bring, and we're super excited to bring it all to all of you. So stephandcraig.co. That's the new website. Energyislove.love is no more. It's now stephandcraig.co. And yeah.
We'll see you there.
What else, babe? Steph's like, let's fucking end this.
I think it's wrap up. I think we've said it. And I think we
Well, I love you.
I love you too.
I love you immensely. I'm so grateful that you were willing to be brave and come on this podcast back in the day for episode 20, and then for all the hundreds of episodes after that, and co-host this mother effer and make it what it is today. And now it's becoming this brand new thing.
Here we go.
The Steph and Craig Show. Here we go.
Right.
So tagline at the end of your episode, right? That's carrying over to the new show. Expect the best. Plan for the greatest. And we are planning for the absolute greatest. We'll see you guys May 1st, new episodes of the Steph and Craig Show. Come hang out with us.